Yes, absolutely.
Recording in progress.
Right, everyone's in.
Okay, we're good to go?
Just one moment, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Vice Chair McCormick. We're ready to go.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, good morning, and I'll call this meeting of the Kahlon Regional District Planning Committee to order for December the 6th, 2023, and acknowledge the meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of Kahlon Nation. I'm Sandy McCormick, the Vice Chair of this committee. Our Chair, Jason Lennox, is away today, and we welcome his alternate, Director Adamson. And so we will now turn to our agenda. And directors, you have the Planning Committee agenda in front of you. Could I please have a motion to adopt the agenda? Director Gisborne, Director Brander, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing no hands, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. The minutes of November the 1st. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing no hands, a motion to adopt the minutes, please. Gisborne, Director Brander, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing no hands, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. We have no delegations or inquiries, no unfinished business, and correspondence 6.1, and a number of items under 6.2. Is there any business arising from this correspondence? Director Gisborne.
Yes, I have a question about 6.2.
Yes.
We have a number of correspondence here about Area BOCP and the zoning bylaw. We have directed staff at the previous board meeting for a report on floor area ratio and building coverage ratio. I'm just wondering, should we respond, or what would the best way to proceed with responding to the correspondence, or should we just say, hey, we're going to be getting a staff report on this, and then when we get that staff report we can take a look at the next steps? Is that a good understanding?
Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I would direct this question to Manager of Planning Services, Laura Rodden.
Thank you. Ms. Rodden.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, my read of the correspondence is that the residents are raising concerns about the Nootka Ridge rezoning application. And there is a public information meeting that's scheduled for next week. All of the residents within the neighborhood would have received their invitation to that open house at this time. So I don't think any response to the correspondence is required.
Thank you, Ms. Rodden. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, there are some concerns about the proposed development, which that one it still has to go through the process. There was also some of the correspondence had some comments about changing the zoning bylaw in general, or some of the how to change the overall framework. But I think at this point we're still waiting for the staff report. So to change the overall zoning bylaw, we'd have to wait for an OCP change, and that would happen after public engagement, which would happen after the staff report. And I think that's the right way forward. So I don't think we need to do anything at this time. So I think that makes sense. Okay.
Okay, thank you. There being no business arising from the correspondence, we will go on to item 8, reports. And the first one is on the Krompocker Road zoning bylaw public hearing. There are some blanks in the recommendation. Who would like to move this and fill in the blanks? Director Brander.
Well, we're not quite there yet. We have one motion ahead of it that the committee recommended the board give first and second reading. Or am I too far ahead here? No, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're not up to 8.2 yet. We're 8.1.
Right, sorry,
I will
8.1.
move that. I'll move that.
Okay, Director Brander, seconded by?
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay, Director Gisborne. Discussion on recommendation number 1 under 8.1. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. It's an interesting staff report, with some of the comments from the public, and it's also interesting to see how some of the properties were sold, and that's kind of tipped the balance in who actually signed the petition and who's in favor. And it was also interesting to see the differences between phase 1 and phase 2, and how there's a proposed restriction in here on short-term rentals. And as a result of seeing that kind of language of restriction of short-term rentals, it brought to mind the Short-Term Rental Act, which I think was passed in October, and some discussion that I heard from other electoral area directors in other regions. And the province is in the process of coming up with some regulatory framework and enforcement on short-term rentals. But talking to my colleagues in other areas, the province, once again, still hasn't shown all their cards. So I don't really know, is this necessarily a problem that we should be solving when the province might actually be coming up with more regulations around short-term rentals? So that's one that kind of has me wondering if maybe it should be postponed for consideration until after we find out what the province is up to. And the other point is this proposed zoning bylaw covers some parcels or parts of parcels of agricultural land reserve. And short-term rentals are a currently allowable use on ALR. So my thoughts is if we're going to be bringing in a zoning bylaw that affects ALR and further restricts the properties beyond what is allowed with agricultural use, then if this does actually get first and second reading, it should also go to the Agricultural Advisory Committee. But those are just my initial thoughts. Just to start discussion doesn't mean I'm actually in favor of the bylaw. So I'd like to hear what other committee members have to say.
Hey, Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I just see this as the next step in the process that we have laid out in front of us. And if we look at the second recommendation, it is recommending that we have public hearings based on this bylaw prior to going to any third or final, any adoption. So that'll give a time period for the public to weigh in on it, and also I imagine staff to keep abreast as to changes that are happening currently.
Thank you, Director Brander. Is there any further discussion on recommendation number 1? Seeing no hands, I will
Director
Gisborne has his hand up.
Sorry, Director Gisborne.
Yeah. Right now, with Bill 44 that's been dropped on our plate, I think there's going to be a lot of work for staff to do as we figure out what these regulations mean in our electoral areas. And we've already asked our staff for a report on floor area ratio and potential also lot coverage and how that can affect our OCP. And I think that actually might become a more significant amount of work, especially if we want to, at a future date, direct staff to start updating those OCPs and policies. We've had correspondence on our agenda to ask that, the Nootka Street zoning bylaw be amended, like one of our existing zoning bylaws. They're asking for it to be updated. The province's correspondence was saying that, they're not in favor of spot zoning, just the little neighborhood at a time with their own special rules. And so the current proposed zoning bylaw as it is before us, I actually don't support it at this time. I would be in favor of either postponing it until we find out what the province's plans are with short-term rentals and how Bill 44, which is now actually law, affects us and the workload of our planning department. And, because there's we don't have a ton of staff. And I'd really like to see those housing policies updated, because when you take a look the proposed zoning bylaw, at the very end, it says the density is 1 dwelling per hectare. Yes, the secondary suite is an allowable accessory use, but technically that Bill 44 says minimum is now 2 dwellings per hectare. But that's the issue of this new legislation, is there's even guidelines the province is coming out with that I'm not sure, have they released them yet? I think it was getting close to being released. So at this time, I think they said it was the 8th that it was coming out about Bill 44 info, and it's the 6th. So yeah, at this time, I don't actually support it. There's too many uncertainties, and there's a lot on the plate of our staff right now.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there any further discussion? Director Adamson.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm inclined to agree with Director Gisborne, because I was just reading up on that legislation related to higher densities that the province is going to be trying to open up, if not impose upon different areas. And I'm just worried if we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, creating a bylaw that's going to limit density when it sounds like that situation might be changing in the future. So I don't know how fast that the legislation is going to come into play, if it comes into play at all, but I did wonder if it might be prudent just to give it a pause for a couple of months and see where that plays out.
Okay, thank you. And we are in a process at the moment. I see Director Brander's hand up, and perhaps you're going to address that question. Otherwise, I was going to ask staff for comment. But go ahead, Director Brander.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Just as a general feeling, I don't think that we can govern based on what may happen in the future. I think we have to look at the situation that we have in front of us, which is a group of people up at Krompocker Road who have petitioned the regional district to have this zoning bylaw go forward. And I think it would be unfair to keep them waiting for a period of time based on something we don't know is going to come down the pike.
Thank you. And we do have due process set out, and it's due process here that is being followed. So is there any further comment on recommendation number 1? Whose hands am I seeing? Ms. Rodden, please go ahead. Thank you.
Through the chair, yeah, if I could just add a little bit of clarity. The province's new legislation regarding short-term rentals does not apply to communities under 5,000 or rural electoral areas. That being said, many municipalities and regional districts do restrict short-term rentals in an effort to leave those units available for long-term rentals. And this community in the engagement made it clear they have concerns about short-term rentals, and they don't want properties in their neighborhood to follow the example of the development at Emmons Beach, where there's many units available for short-term rental. And in regards to Bill 44 and the other housing statutes, there again, rural electoral areas will not be obligated to have multi-unit housing on single-family residential properties. A secondary suite and an accessory dwelling unit will be supported, and those are being supported in the OCP amending bylaws we have moving forward in Area A and Area C early next year. So from the planning department's perspective, we don't see any valid reason to hold off on the zoning, and the neighborhood has been waiting since 2021 for some regulations to enforce OCP policies.
Thank you, Ms. Rodden. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'll do also my last kick at it. The short-term rental, the legislation, yes, applies to, I think, 5,000 or 10,000 population, but there's also a regulatory department that is being created by the province. So they will then have authority over short-term rentals and how that regulatory framework works for them. Whether that applies to us or not, I'm not sure. But we do need to take into account the views of the community. Absolutely agree. We've got one small section of the community that years ago put in a petition for this zoning bylaw, but we also did a Let's Talk Land Use public engagement for the whole electoral area as well, areas A, area B, and area C. And that public engagement came back with opposition to new rules and regulations. And the way these zoning bylaws work is they are paid for by everyone in the planning service. It's not just paid for by one neighborhood, it's paid for by the whole area. So when we do public engagement for the whole area and the whole area says, no, we don't want it, but then one small subset says we do, well, we as a committee then have to weigh the will of the greater area that pays for it versus the small area that wants it. And if the bylaw benefits the greater area, then I'm in favor of it. If the bylaw just benefits the small subsection of the area, not so much. And commercial recreation is an allowable use in the OCP. And the zoning bylaw would say, well, no short-term rentals in this area, but it says in the OCP, commercial recreation is allowed. To me, commercial recreation is short-term rentals, campsites, that kind of thing. And if area A doesn't want short-term rentals on commercial recreation properties, that should be clarified in the OCP for general consistency across the area. Because that's what we're starting to see from the province, wanting to see more consistency between zoning bylaws and official community plans. So at this time, I would vote against it, but I would vote in favor of postponing it until April, until after our budget season has concluded. That's how I feel.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Gisborne. CAO.
Yeah, through the chair, I think for the purpose of this particular item, the committee should be, I guess, focusing on the fair process. In the fair process, when you take into consideration that the intent of this application was performed back in 2021, and we're now nearing the end of 2023, I think you need to consider what would be courteous and respectful to those individuals, those landowners, those property owners. Aside from what's coming down the pike now or later from the province, that's, I think, irrelevant to this process at the moment. I think we really have to focus on the process. These people, these landowners, should be given and allowed the opportunity to speak to you at a public hearing to tell you their thoughts. And without allowing them that, then you are, in essence, stifling them and shutting them down. And I think it's already been mentioned before that during this process, other things are going to come up, you know, in due course, which then could be incorporated. But the current thing right now, I think, is to do the fair process consideration and be respectful of those people that are impacted by what it is that they are desiring.
Thank you, CAO. And just to point out that we are not approving the zoning bylaw at this point. We are approving giving first and second reading. We are in the middle of this process, and this is the continuation of that. Yeah, I'd like to wrap up discussion on this item because we're talking about giving first and second reading to the bylaw. We're not talking about the content of the bylaw itself. So can we wrap up discussion on this item? Director Gisborne, you've had multiple opportunities to speak. Do you have something new to add to the discussion?
Yes, I'd just like to respond to the CAO's point that yes, we need to be proper and respectful to the people that are impacted by this bylaw. And I believe the people that are impacted by this bylaw are those that pay for it.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. All right. If there's no further hands, I would like to call for a vote on item number 1 under 8.1. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Any opposed? one opposed. Thank you. Director Gisborne is opposed. We'll move on to recommendation number 2, which is the holding, to delegate holding of the public hearing and to appoint directors to participate in that public hearing. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I'll move the recommendation with Director Gisborne, Director Lennox, and Director Brander in the blanks, with Director Lennox be appointed to chair the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne, Director Brander, Director Lennox, with Director Lennox to be the chair. What is your pleasure with this item? Is there a seconder?
Yeah, second.
Okay, any discussion? Director Gisborne, sorry, I've lost my picture.
Yeah, I'm happy to go to the public hearing, even though I'm not in favor of the bylaw at this time. I do look forward to hearing from the public, and maybe they'll convince me to say yes. So
Thank you.
I'm in support of this motion.
Thank you very much. Is there further discussion? Seeing no hands, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimous. 8.2, which is the referral for aquaculture use in Okeover Inlet and Area A. You have a recommendation before you. What is your pleasure, directors? Okay.
Recommendation.
Director Brander, thank you. Seconded by Director Gisborne, thank you. Discussion? All right. I'm seeing no hands. If that's correct, we will move on to the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. There are no items of new business. Question period. Are there any questions for the committee?
Hello, Chair Galinsky from the Peak here.
Hi, Paul.
Good day. I hope you are well.
Thank you.
My question was with regard to item 6.2, correspondence received from Nootka Street residents. During the discussion, it was brought up by the manager of planning services that there will be a public engagement. I realize it's not the responsibility of the regional district to put this on, but I was wondering if the manager knows when and where that engagement will be taking place.
Thank you. We'll try and get you an answer. Ms. Rodden, you're muted.
I will defer to Julia Dykstra because I know she has the notice handy right there.
On my phone.
Thank you. Ms. Dykstra.
Thank you through the chair. The meeting will be held on December 14th, which is next Thursday from 4 until 6 at the Nootka Ridge Development in their amenity building. And it is an open house format.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the response to the question. That was my question, Chair.
Perfect. Thanks, Mr. Galinsky. Any further questions? Seeing none, there is an in-camera session. Would someone like to move the motion to go in camera?
I can do it.
Yeah.
I move that the committee move in camera, that the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under section 91A, personal information that about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the regional district or another position appointed by the regional district, and N, the consideration of whether a committee meeting should be closed under provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
Thank you. Seconded by, I'm looking for a hand to second it. Director Brander, thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. We're going in camera. Thank you.
we're back in open session.
Thank you, Michelle. So, thank you. Welcome back. We have no rise in report from our in-camera session, so our meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Okay, so is that it till this afternoon?
Yeah, it will be the same link when we come back at 12:30, and we'll start the meeting early again.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, see you later.
Bye.
Yeah, George, that's why I asked the question, because it had been 2.5 years since.
So I think we start at 12:30.